Hello, I would like to share some data I've collected relating to students' usage of, perceptions of, and beliefs about current-gen artificial intelligence. I'll talk about some common pitfalls for faculty who are teaching students during this time of change, but also some promising ideas for integrating AI in ways that are pedagogically useful, as a tool rather than a crutch. But also, don't expect AI to be some panacea that propels forward student learning and performance either. We have to tread carefully and design our policies, activities, and assessments thoughtfully if we want to guide students into successfully navigating the ever-shifting career landscape they're about to find themselves in. Now, when I talk about AI here, I don't mean the classic conception of what used to be called strong AI, and now they call artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Current gen technology, however impressive it is in some use cases, is not that. So what I'm talking about here is primarily large language models, or LLMs, and the apps, wrappers, and interfaces that they power. You're obviously familiar at this point with chat interfaces like ChatGPT, Bard, and Bing, and likely some of the visual creation tools like Midjourney, DALL-E, or various Stable Diffusion applications. But what some don't realize is that in the current tech gold rush, LLMs are getting integrated every day into just about everything our students have at hand. That means the quote-unquote study sites like Chegg, but also Snapchat and Instagram have AIs built in that my students tell me they use for homework. Meanwhile, for a long time, students have been told maybe to use Grammarly to catch typos and simple grammar mistakes. But what many professors and some student users may not realize is that Grammarly is AI now. It's using the same GPT model that powers ChatGPT and so many other applications. Indeed, one of the first false accusation stories to go viral a while back was a student posting on Reddit about how they'd been falsely accused of using AI and how they had written the paper themselves but only used Grammarly Premium to fix some problems and add some sentences. Only to be told that Grammarly indeed uses AI. And of course, LLMs are already powering Microsoft Word and Google Docs, so students will be using this technology whether they intend to or not. And of course, from the standpoint of a professor who assigns any sort of writing, this can feel problematic. Plagiarism detectors have been good for a long time at catching someone who lazily copy-pastes from a source, but they're not so good with content produced by LLMs. Indeed, that's why we call this tech generative AI. It is actually generating novel sentences and brand new wording. The model, basically a very, very fancy and high-powered regression model, has picked up on the syntactical rules of language in some sense, the same way most of us do. Certain things seem to go together in certain ways, without consciously or explicitly having to understand all the formal rules of syntax. And these models have pieced together, so to speak, through statistical associations, which tokens of language tend to go with which other tokens of language, almost akin to Safran's famous study on statistical language learning in infants who pick up on the pattern of phonemes used by their parents. So these things are able to generate brand new sentences that just won't match any source that plagiarism detectors look for. Now, early on in 2023, you probably got some advice to just AI-proof your assignments. Maybe that meant assigning podcasts or videos to analyze, since for a few months the popular models appeared to only work on text. Or maybe you were told to require references and then to look for fake references, or hallucinations that are, in the real style with real names, but aren't a real journal article. Maybe you were told the LLM was trained on data only through a particular year, so have students analyze recent news. That might be AI-proof. Unfortunately, the tech didn't stand still, and it won't stand still going forward. So in no time at all last year, the most popular platform, ChatGPT, introduced plugins for paid subscribers, who can now have the service search actual paywall databases, download PDFs of journal articles, analyze and summarize those PDFs, and certainly churn out proper citations and references in APA style. With plugins, ChatGPT can surf the internet live and tell you all about this day's news. It can summarize an audio podcast or a TED Talk or a YouTube video. It can work with Excel. It can code in R and a bunch of other use cases that, frankly, make it hard for any assignment to be AI-proof if the student has access to an internet-connected device. And they do. So I'm going to pivot here for a few minutes to tell you about some data I've been collecting from students relating to their usage of AI and also their perceptions, beliefs, and opinions about it. But while we are hyper-focused on the perspective of the instructor, so how to assess learning or assign writing in an era when a B paper, maybe even an A paper, is just a click away, our students right now are also dealing with this changing landscape. And for them, it's not all rosy. Indeed, as you'll see, many of them feel a little lost right now. So I surveyed a few hundred psychology students as a sort of pilot study with a larger sample in the works, and here's what I've found. First off, at this point, most students consider themselves familiar with generative AI. So from 1, not at all, to 5, very familiar, there's a definite negative skew here. But the thing is, on average, they are more nervous or fearful about AI than they are excited about it. As I've found again and again, students are kind of unsure about things right now. That said, students are using it. And that means in ways that are explicitly allowed, yes, though as you can see, quite a lot of them aren't using it much directly, or at least not knowingly using it. And they are also using it in ways that are explicitly banned or prohibited. Not all of them, of course. The majority, as you can see, say that they aren't. But many more admit to using it in situations that are ambiguous, in ways that they aren't sure if it's allowed, but also may not be explicitly banned. So have no doubt, AI written content is in any of your take-home coursework, whether it's papers or discussion posts, and some students will misuse it. We can't undo that, and they're currently finding and sharing all the latest prompt engineering tricks across social media like TikTok or Snap. They know how to run output through Humanizer Pro if the first run sounds too robotic. They know how to make the ChatGPT invent personal anecdotes, add stray typos, or avoid saying "in conclusion" for the final paragraph. There is more of them than there is of us, so expect them to adapt faster in any arms race. But honestly, this is all framing things around the minority who are currently using it to cheat. Meanwhile, regardless of how much actual cheating is happening, students think a lot of their peers are using it to cheat. Most seem to think around half of their peers are cheating with AI. And that's despite the fact, again, that most of them are actually not knowingly doing so themselves. So in a sense, they overestimate how much cheating their peers are doing. But this can have some side effects. For one thing, the more they think their peers are using it to cheat, the more likely they are to do the same. And when asked about the morality of using AI, even in ways that are banned, only a minority think it's morally acceptable. But many more students think ambiguous use cases are morally acceptable, assuming they won't get caught. Now, it turns out the more familiar a student is with AI, the more excited they are about it, which makes sense. But also the more morally acceptable they find banned and ambiguous uses of it in their schoolwork. The students who know the most about AI are more likely to use it to get ahead, which could lead to a rich get richer effect for students who are, less familiar, more tentative, and more nervous about AI, and thus using it less, they might be left behind. I'll come back to this idea in a moment, but first, knowing that a sizable minority of students are happy to use AI in ways that are explicitly banned, it's natural to want to catch these students. So, we set them back on a more productive learning journey. And to do that, we need to detect work that is generated by AI. And indeed, you can spot AI. In the sense that current generation ChatGPT and its congeners they have a particular style of writing. As we've no doubt all seen in the recent slew of overly formal emails from students who miss class or want to make up. And if you've played around with LLMs for a while now, especially popular interfaces like ChatGPT, you can probably spot some of the tells in its default output. However, even if you can spot AI, you can't spot AI. As I mentioned before, students are already sharing all the little prompt engineering tricks and canned prompts to get AI to write in ways that are very hard to detect. Even a year ago, you could do this yourself just by telling it to write more like a junior undergrad, or to add some minor mistakes, or ask it not to organize the output like a 5-paragraph essay, or even just to sound less like an AI. With very little effort, the output can be made much harder to spot, especially for us overworked professors who may have dozens or more copies of an assignment to grade. And of course, early in 2023, you probably came up with the idea to defeat AI papers by requiring staggered assignments, first an outline, then a draft of one section, and so on. But now you'll find students telling each other how to not only generate the paper, but have ChatGPT turn it into an outline, or back-generate what looks like a draft of a section with some earlier errors and different ordering of ideas. So now instead of 3 minutes to write a research paper, they may have to spend 6. And before you get too confident about your ability to spot AI output, remember the good old toupee fallacy, a fun form of survivorship bias. Everyone thinks they can spot a toupee a mile away, but you only know about the ones you did spot, which are going to be the most obvious ones, and you don't notice all the ones that were so good you missed them. You are not a great AI detector, and with time, as the tech progresses, your detection abilities will probably get worse. Now, what about personal reflection assignments, you might ask? An AI doesn't have lived experience, right? But again, what may have seemed a promising tactic a year ago to AI-proof assignments is not really any good now. Even at the most blunt level, you can simply tell ChatGPT to pretend it's a college student, to include specifics and anecdotes, and to write in the first person from that perspective. To give you an example, it took me about 20 seconds to have ChatGPT write me a pretty decent personal statement applying to graduate school and counseling. And while it could use some tidying up, ChatGPT's raw output on the first try had no problem talking about very personal experiences and reflecting about them. So you can see here, as a college student who has faced domestic violence, my academic journey has been a testament to resilience and transformation. In my case, it's fueled a passion to understand the human mind, to empathize with those who suffer in silence, and advocate for change. Initially, my academic performance suffered. I struggled with concentration, memory, and a pervasive sense of anxiety. Counseling became my sanctuary, a place where I was heard, validated, supported, yada, yada, yada. With a bit more prompting, it could sound even more authentic. But the point is, it takes basically no effort at all to add personal reflection, as countless AI-written discussion board posts over the last year can attest to. So what we've got here should be familiar to most psychology faculty. This is a classic signal detection problem. And if we ourselves can't spot AI accurately, we also know now that automated detectors are not the godsend we're looking for. To put it lightly, they're crap. And even if they were pretty darn good at it, we're still stuck with nothing but the say-so of a black box algorithm telling us a student may have cheated, which is much easier for a student to dispute than, say, a copy-pasted paragraph from WebMD or a journal article. And don't get your hopes up about solutions that tech companies are working on. So watermarking text can, in theory, work with a large enough text output, thanks to some statistical tricks, but that only works if every LLM, every app, every company applies watermarking. And they won't, because there is a lot of money to be made here, same as with Chegg and its ilk. Someone will happily supply the tools to cheat even if the popular app like ChatGPT doesn't. And this is the same problem with hoping the systems will build in guardrails. Not only are most guardrails defeated with some simple jailbreaking prompts, like Heavy Dan in 2023, but any service that successfully guardrails against cheating will just push students to a different service. And we saw in the fall of 23 when Perplexity released an uncensored model that was happy to tell users, where and when it would be best to set off a nuke in Chicago to maximize casualties, or how to gaslight and mentally torture a partner, or how to make persuasive sexist arguments, and happy to generate political disinformation text for posting on social media. So we simply can't assume that all the tech companies will work together to solve this problem for us. And so we plod on doing our best to detect AI despite being imperfect detectors. And this is a real problem because false positives have a serious cost in trust. Like in this funny little email exchange that went viral, where the sender wrote to a service, "The AI design of your email is clever, but significantly lacks warmth. Would it be possible to be contacted by a human moving forward instead of AI?" To which they heard back, "I'm not an AI, I'm just autistic." This kind of thing can cause real harm. And indeed, when asked if they'd been falsely accused by a professor of using AI when they didn't actually use it, an astounding 10% of my sample said yes. That's a lot of students who now have a tainted relationship with their professor or their school. And meanwhile, of the 90% who haven't been falsely accused, 2/3 of them are still worried about it, worried they may suffer false accusations. And by now we've all seen the data that English language learners are much more likely to suffer false accusations of AI usage than native speakers. And to add to that, in my sample, I found that first-generation students are significantly more likely to report being falsely accused of using AI than non-first-generation students. So our signal detection failures might also be perpetuating inequities and harming those who already have higher hurdles in university education. Meanwhile, when asked about it, students are unsure whether AI is going to increase or decrease inequality in the short run. But they lean toward AI increasing inequality when asked about the long run. So some of them, like us, are also thinking about the social implications of this technology. And let me tell you, students are definitely hearing a lot about how AI will fit into their life post-graduation. And one thing a lot of students have told me in confidence is that they are using AI, even in banned or ambiguous use cases, because they want to be competitive when they graduate and they see the real world as not caring about things like plagiarism or cheating. As one student put it, jobs don't care how you get your work done or what tools you use. Indeed, in my survey, I asked the extent to which students agree with the following statement. Unlike college, jobs and industries care more about the product and output of work than they do about the process used to get there. And sure enough, most students agree or strongly agree with this. Plagiarism and cheating are things professors care about, but jobs only care about performance and the bottom line. And indeed, the more students think that jobs don't care about how work gets done, the more they think it's moral to use AI in banned and ambiguous ways. So these beliefs about later career come with a philosophical outlook on current behavior in their classes. That said, the whole reason they're thinking about this is because most students at this point do see AI as relevant to their future career. And to go along with that, many see experience with AI as necessary in their college training. They want to learn how to use it so they aren't left behind. And indeed, the more a student thinks that AI is going to increase inequality, the more they think it's necessary to learn it and gain experience with AI in college. Now, when asked about how they're encountering it in their actual classes, some or most professors do appear to be addressing AI in some way at this point. However, most professors aren't requiring or integrating AI into their classes. So for the most part, students are getting a syllabus statement or instructions not to use it on a particular assignment, rather than having it actually incorporated into their learning or gaining skills with generative AI. Now that said, I'm not here to proselytize or convince everyone they need to integrate AI directly into their courses. But one thing I can say for sure is that you do need to address it in some way. You need to make decisions for your course and make explicit policies. Do you ban it altogether? Do you allow it but require them to cite any usage? Or maybe you integrate it and have them use it or critically evaluate it or address it as part of their learning in some way. Regardless of your choice, the key thing is to communicate clearly, be transparent, and be proactive about it. But do address it, because if you don't, then a lot of use cases will be interpreted as ambiguous. And as we saw, a lot of students are much more comfortable using AI in ambiguous use cases than in ways that are outright forbidden. Meanwhile, I'd argue that concentrating solely on the cheaters and constantly fighting a losing battle in an arms race with technically savvy students is a recipe for burnout and bitterness on our part. And in my opinion, it can create an adversarial relationship even with students who don't cheat. So I said I wouldn't preach, but now I'm going to preach a little bit. I really think you should consider integrating AI into your courses, into the actual teaching and learning, as a tool to help learning. And I don't mean the shitty calculator analogy that a lot of tech-forward educators have been falling back on for the last year. LLMs are not like calculators. Indeed, the current models fail at some math tasks a calculator would never screw up. And I don't think we should be offloading all of our writing to LLMs the way our students might offload long division to a calculator. But what I would like to pitch is a way of incorporating AI into your courses, not as a passive shortcut or a crutch, but as a part of their active learning. Partly, that's to give them the skills they need to be digitally fluent and prepared for the quickly changing landscape that they're going to graduate into. After all, if they're simply using AI to do their assignments and get that coveted piece of paper, as they like to call the degree, then they may be shocked when they realize a hiring manager is happy to lease out the AI rather than hire them. But also because, like anything else, our students should be learning and thinking critically about the elements, influences, and events that are part of their world. If we educate students about current generation AI, what it really is and what it isn't, its limits and errors and hallucinations, its risks and biases and blind spots, then we send our students out into the world more ready to be leaders and more ready to ethically apply technology or guide the development of the next stage of technology. So then, you might ask, what does it look like to integrate AI into the psychology curriculum? And here, I'll offer just a few humble examples to give a feel, but honestly, my colleagues around the country and around the globe are innovating left and right in this space right now, and I can only beg you all to share your ideas and experiences, ideally as open educational resources, so that others can benefit and build on your cool work. Okay, I'll start with an easy example. Many of us teach professional technical writing, whether it's in intro psych or research methods or throughout topical upper division courses. And one thing students universally struggle with is writing at the appropriate level, or tailoring their writing to different audiences. And you can use AI, or even have students use AI, to teach them what it looks like to convey the same idea in different language and with varying formality. So you could, say, have them critically analyze examples where you, or they, have had ChatGPT generate, the same two-paragraph explanation of a concept at the level of someone with a PhD, or a senior psych major, or a first-gen college student, or a middle schooler, or even explain it like I'm 5. The key thing here is that you can cook all of these examples up in 2 minutes. Or alternately, you could first have them write an article summary at 2 different levels or in 2 different ways, and then compare what they wrote to some AI-generated output summarizing the same article. This kind of thing is also good for teaching paraphrasing, a skill that many students struggle with when writing a literature review or annotated bibliography. There is a tendency to rely way too much on the author's original wording, whether in direct quotes or unintentional plagiarism. But that's because of fancy technical language that they see in these journal articles. But with AI output, students could see 5 or 10 different ways to paraphrase the exact same technical sentence or technical paragraph into brand new words, and then practice that skill themselves. Another activity which integrates AI would be like teaching students to be critical consumers of it, would be like a fact-checking or reference finding assignment. So as you probably know, the free version of ChatGPT, which is 3.5, does hallucinate fake references fairly often, and even 4.0 can do that sometimes, depending on how it's prompted. And of course, the issue students need to realize is not just that AI output will sometimes confidently say things that are wrong. The deeper issue is that current AI is not critical of what it regurgitates. You might metaphorically say that it is overly trusting of its sources, the way some of our less savvy students might be overly trusting of ChatGPT's output. The AI will confidently tell you whatever conclusion a journal article came to, but it is much worse at pointing out why that conclusion might be sketchy or wrong. And it can parrot the limitations listed in the article's discussion section, but it can't recognize flaws that the authors themselves didn't acknowledge in the paper. So how do we get students to see this, to see that ChatGPT can't do their critical thinking and reasoning for them? The easiest way might be to assign students to use ChatGPT to generate an APA-style lit review on a topic of their choice, complete with citations and references. That only takes a minute or two, maybe a few more with reprompting. But then the rest of the assignment is the student checking if those references exist, finding and downloading the sources that it found and used, and then reading those sources closely enough to analyze and judge how accurately ChatGPT used the references, what it left out, what it forgot, what it got wrong. As you can see here, it's easy to get to those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy where students are not just using AI to look up facts or help organize their thoughts, but instead applying their own reasoning and judgment to what AI produces. Which as a side benefit helps them recognize that this seemingly magical technology does have significant limitations. And of course, an alternative way to do this assignment is to provide them with some journal articles you already know to have some serious unacknowledged errors or logical missteps, and then have the students analyze it, spot the errors, perhaps in groups, and then compare what they found to the simple glowing summary that ChatGPT gives of the article. Another way you could incorporate AI is by gamifying it. Get them to think about, signal detection or to engage in some metacognition about their own ability to spot AI-generated content. After all, they're already embedded in a social media landscape that is filled with bots. And one recent research group estimated that more than half of the internet is now bot-generated content. So they're going to need to learn to keep their guard up against possible bot-generated or AI-generated misinformation. And we know from misinformation research that inoculation is one way to protect against falling for it. So you can think of this activity as a sort of inoculation. A simple example would be having them use AI to cite real journal articles to argue persuasively for, and then to argue persuasively against a given conclusion, so that they can see how easy it is for AI to create arguments that are rhetorically persuasive at first glance. Or have them use AI to generate arguments for patently false claims or made-up pseudoscience so that they can learn to spot the patterns that they'll continue to see in fad psychological treatments and pseudoscientific therapies. A more fun way to do this might be to gamify it. So I create stimuli for demonstrations where some of it comes from me, some from ChatGPT, maybe some from a classic article, and so on, and see how well they can spot what's AI and what's not. Basically, demonstrate in an active learning way that they may not be as good as they think at signal detection. Or, even more fun, they could be assigned to try and trick other students or to try and trick other groups of students, and then add some metacognitive reflection afterward. One thing I think we all see is that students struggle with logical argumentation and logical fallacy. So one thing you could also have them do is analyze where ChatGPT or another AI produces output that involves reasoning errors or commits logical fallacies. Like, ChatGPT can easily produce arguments for or against something, and then students have to apply their course knowledge to judge the soundness of those arguments. Greg Hickok had a great example of this in early 2023 when he was sharing a back and forth where ChatGPT kept failing at reasoning through the facts, that it would, happily spit out these facts about left hemisphere dominance of language and damage to Wernicke's area, but its reasoning kept failing. The point is, though, by having them analyze AI output about a topic they have learned about in depth, they can also start to spot holes in its quote-unquote understanding, and this in turn might inoculate against overly trusting AI output. Meanwhile, another way to integrate AI into the classroom would be to explore bias, ethics, and social issues. As we all know, large language models are trained on a mass corpus of human writing, although they're soon to be feeding on their own excretions like an Ouroboros. But this means that chatbots can perpetuate biases, stereotypes, and problematic human discourse. This is just like what we see with other applications of machine learning, like in facial recognition technology, remote proctoring services that are biased against dark-skinned students, and so on. The data is piling up, showing the ways this tech is by no means neutral or bias-free. Now, it may not seem like, say, ChatGPT is racist, but that's because these interfaces have been fine-tuned through a boatload of human training, human-supervised learning and feedback. It's actually thanks to a bunch of low-paid humans that ChatGPT is hesitant to make an outright sexist joke. But when you do more careful prompting, you find that the system itself has what we might call implicit biases. Similar to studies showing that professors write grad school recommendation letters using very different language to describe their male versus their female students, AIs, when you poke them systematically, will show very different associations and tendencies in language around different groups. And that's all before getting into the bigger social debates about the role of AI in society, about inequality in tech, and so on, that might be relevant fodder for discussion and analysis in many psych courses. The current hubbub over AI also provides a good chance to discuss professional ethics. I've actually talked to a couple people socially outside of work who are in a graduate program to become licensed mental health counselors, and both admitted to using ChatGPT to write all of the papers for their master's program. Do we really want medical or mental health professionals who are so blasé about ethics? And likewise, this is a good time to be more explicit to our students about why we write the way we do in this discipline, about why attributions are important and why plagiarism is problematic, and to get them thinking about the ethical implications of using unreliable sources or tools. And of course, whether in social psychology, cognitive psychology, or some other branch of psych, students should be thinking now about the role of humans in an AI world that we're entering. The world now, but also perhaps what it'll look like if and when we achieve artificial general intelligence, or something more akin to real AI, so to speak. All right, I'll end with just a couple more examples how you might integrate AI into your courses. So to train critical thinking, and especially make students critical consumers, you can use AI to teach them the importance of lateral reading, fact-checking, source-checking, and verifying claims. So maybe instead of read and summarize this journal article as an assignment, consider something like pick out 2 factual claims in this article's introduction section and go check that and document it. Then have them do the same for an AI-generated lit review or introduction section. Ask them to reflect metacognitively on how they determine whether something is accurately described in a source, including an AI output. Or you can connect AI to a lot of existing topical material in psych classes. I mean, cognitive psychology is classically one of the fields that makes up AI, along with computer science, linguistics, philosophy of mind, and the like. Modern AI models explicitly have been developed on the models of neural networks instantiated in actual wet brains. And whether you're discussing transformational grammar or spreading activation in semantic networks, psycholinguistics is ripe for AI discussion. Comparative psychology often discusses whether animals really have language, and now you can have similar discussions about large language models. Developmental psychologists can compare how human infants pick up language to what ChatGPT is doing, and also explore the role of having a body and experiencing sensoromotor interactions in grounding language to an actual understanding of the world. I've actually encouraged some of my students to probe how well current LLMs understand things spatially, or have any form of, quote-unquote mental model of how objects interact physically. Students are surprised when an AI that talks so fancy using technical jargon and perfect grammar can't solve preschool-level navigation or object interaction questions. A more demonstrative example of this might be connecting AI to topic material in judgment decision making, so using AI interactions to demo various cognitive biases. For example, confirmation bias. You might ask students their stance on a series of issues and then randomly assign ChatGPT to give an argument for that stance and also to give an argument against that stance. They maybe judge each ChatGPT argument for how convincing it is, how strong the evidence is, or you randomly assign them to one of the arguments or the other. I'm sure you can see where this is going, because then you can show them with their own data how they might have been biased. So compare across the whole class for how strong they found the exact same output, say the against argument, if they started with that stance versus starting on the opposite side. Or use this to get into the motivated reasoning accounts of human judgment and then go into more modern approaches. In general, though, just like with the Forer effect or so-called Barnum effect demo in personality psychology, I think directly experiencing a cognitive bias can help improve their critical thinking later. Okay, at any rate, these are just a few simple examples of how AI might be integrated in some way into your classroom in ways that range from simply saving you time coming up with exemplars all the way up to having students critically analyze and judge output or work toward kind of higher level reflecting about the role of AI in society or in their own habits and cognition. Now, my key takeaways here are: 1. AI in the form of LLMs is here to stay, and it's likely to remain ubiquitous even once the venture capital gold rush dries up. It is going to be the default in their word processing programs, in their phone, in their social media apps, you name it. 2. Students are unsure. They're nervous. They're confused. And they often misunderstand what AI is and what it's doing when they do use it. In some cases, students may not even be aware they're using AI, like wrongly assuming Grammarly is totally different from ChatGPT, for example. And meanwhile, they are getting mixed messages, with some professors warning them it'll get them kicked out of school, and others tell them it's just another tool or assistant to up their game. And others, maybe professors burying their head in the sand, well, the peers around these students might be cheating all around them. At the same time, their parents are telling them it's essential if they want to still have a job in 4 years. So it's a lot to process, and the data shows that these students feel as lost as many of us feel. 3, meanwhile, even the honest students are worried about false accusation, and for good reason, because whether it's an automated detector or our own brain detectors, this is simply too hard of a signal detection problem to reliably find anything but the worst and laziest examples. And false positives are very costly. Every student who gets falsely accused or finds themselves in trouble for something they weren't sure was or wasn't allowed ends up losing trust in the system and in us. And even the other students see the adversarial stance that we're taking when all of our focus is on catching cheaters. 4, they are worried about life after graduation, and they want AI training. Meanwhile, they might have some misconceptions about the world of the workforce, like assuming jobs won't care if they used AI to do all their work in school, without realizing their shortcuts now might be shortchanging their chances later on. But we can guide them and teach them. At minimum, we can guide them by providing clear and transparent expectations of AI usage in our own classes. But I think beyond that, we should consider integrating AI into their learning so that they can be critical users and consumers in an AI-saturated world, and so they have the best chance to be leaders and to be voices of ethics and justice in a future where AI influences countless aspects of the human sphere.